Up next, Gordon and I take a look at the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark III on the Camera Labs Photography Podcast. Hi, it's Doug Kay. I'm here with Mr. Camera Labs, Gordon Lang. Gordon, how are you today?
I'm very good, Doug. Great to see you as always.
Oh, marvelous to see you. Marvelous to see you. Hey, you got a little camera there. It looks big in the picture, but I know for a fact that it's not a very big camera.
I know it's large but close.
Yeah, objects on screen are larger than they appear, or something like that.
Yeah, this is the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark III, which is a very compact mid-range mirrorless camera. But before we go into the review of that, I just want to thank everyone, as always, for all your comments and your likes. If you want to support us, buy Doug and I a cup of coffee. There's a link below the video. And please do remember to subscribe to the videos in YouTube or to the podcasts in iTunes or wherever else you're finding them. It really helps when you subscribe or click like or give us a star. So show us your appreciation and we'll love you back.
And tell your friends.
Yes, definitely. All of them. Right. Should we get on?
Get on right away.
Okay. So this is the EM10 Mark III. It's obviously the third model in this series. It replaces the Mark II, which came out 2 years before. It's a mid-range mirrorless camera. So it's designed as a kind of step up from basic entry-level models without the weight, the size, and the cost and unnecessary sophistication of more expensive models. So it's kind of designed for people who are looking for an upgrade, say from a point and shoot, a smartphone. It's kind of like your first entry into the world of photography that has a camera with a bigger than average sensor, that has interchangeable lenses, and has a great deal of manual control for when you want to grow and explore those exposure options. So that's kind of who it's aimed at. I've got it here, if you're watching the video, with the 14 to 42 millimeter collapsing kit zoom. I will show you it collapsing later on in the show. And it makes for a very, very compact combination, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the headlines, though, before we go any further, it uses a 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor. Now, to give you some sort of idea where that fits in, micro four thirds is smaller than APS-C, which, of course, is also smaller than full frame, but it's bigger than the 1-inch sensors you find on enthusiast class point and shoot cameras, and way bigger than the tiny sensors that you get in smartphones or kind of, basic point and shoot cameras. So yes, the sensor is smaller than APS-C, but not massively smaller. So that kind of is where it fits in. It has built-in stabilization that works with any lens you attach. It shifts the sensor. It has a built-in viewfinder, a tilting touchscreen, Wi-Fi, and 4K video. If you're looking at the earlier Mark II, the main upgrades on the Mark III are 4K video and kind of improvements on the usability and ease of use of this camera. And at first, you might think, crumbs, is that it? Just 4K and they've juggled the menus and a few of the buttons. But believe me, as I'll show you throughout this show, the improvements they've made to the user interface and the way that you access some of the more sophisticated and advanced modes on this, it really does actually make a world of difference. So, they've kind of juggled stuff around, put on a surprisingly good quality 4K mode and come up with the Mark III. So Doug, how much are we looking at for this camera?
Here in the U.S., without a lens, this camera is $649. Quite a good price. Nice.
Yeah, or $799 with this 14 to 42 lens. Now, be aware that it is often, especially also with the Mark II, available in two different kits. You may see one with an older 14 to 42 that's larger, that doesn't collapse. So if you want the really compact version, make sure you look out for the EZ version of this lens, like say $799 US with that lens. So what else are we going to compare this to, Doug?
We're certainly going to look at the older, the Mark II, the EM10 Mark II. You want to know that price now? Do you want to look at that?
Sure.
All right. That camera is $150 cheaper as of today. So you can go to $499 and get, again, a slightly older version. I'm sorry. No, that's right. Yes, $499. That's it. You can step up to the EM5 Mark II, also a great camera, $899, so another $250 as compared to this one. Some of our favorites, you've got the Lumix G80/G85. I don't know if you have a price without a lens, Gordon, for that, but that's $1,000 roughly with a lens here in the U.S.
Okay.
So it's a little apples to oranges. Do you know can you buy the Lumix G80 in the UK without a lens?
It depends where you go. They do try and sell it with it, but it does. They Panasonic do a really nice 14 to 42 kit zoom as well. Yeah, so it's very good quality, very light as well.
Fuji, if you want to go to the APS-C, a larger sensor, you can step up to the XT20, which costs $250 more than this camera, or $899 US. Also in the crop sensor department in the APS-C, the Sony a6500, which is comparable. You'll explain it, but it's comparable in that it has the image stabilization and a lot of the other features that this camera has. But that camera is $750 more than this. That's almost $1,400 US.
So it's double the price.
Yeah, it is. It's more than double the price of this camera. And Sony have been sort of at the premium price end of all of the cameras that they shoot, I think, in the mirrorless department at least. So, in particular, other than the prior version of this camera, this is one of the least expensive ways to get into any of these mirrorless products.
Yeah, definitely. And that's very important to kind of remind ourselves of that. When we look at the feature set and you look at the sensor size, it's important to remember that the EM10 Mark III is coming in at a lower price point than any of those models. And if you are looking for a camera with a fair size sensor, a built-in viewfinder, and interchangeable lenses at this price point, your options are actually surprisingly limited. Now, we mentioned the Sony a6500, which is the most recent and highest end model in their APS-C range. That's if you want built-in stabilization, if you want a touch screen and you want 4K video. You can go down to the A6300, which loses the touch screen and the built-in stabilization, but still has 4K and APS-C, but that's still over $1,000, as I recall. You can go back way further to the A6000, which is a model we continue to mention because it's still available. I checked the price just as before we filmed this show. You're looking at about $649 for the A6000 with the 16 to 50mm kit zoom, which is pretty good. I mean, that's actually about the same price as this camera without a lens. So it comes in cheaper with a lens. But remember, as you go back on those earlier Sony models, you are gradually losing features. So the A6000 may have great continuous autofocus and burst shooting, but the electronic viewfinder is low resolution. There's no touch sensitivity on the screen. There's no 4K video either. So the A6000 may have that bigger APS-C sensor and great continuous autofocus, but it's missing out on some of the other things. Another model worth mentioning is a DSLR, which it's always worth looking at the low end at Canon and Nikon's DSLRs. I think Canon has really nailed it with the EOS 200D, or Rebel SL2 as it's known in North America. That camera is $699 with the 18 to 55 kit zoom. So it's in the same sort of ballpark as this. And that camera's got great movie autofocus, great continuous autofocus, whether you're shooting through the viewfinder or in live view with the screen, whether you're doing stills or movies. And it's a compact camera, nowhere near as compact as the Olympus, but for a DSLR, it's pretty compact. And we did a big review of that, Doug and I, and there's also a more in-depth version of that at cameralabs.com. I like the 200D SL2. So if you're looking at a low-cost, interchangeable lens camera with a viewfinder, I'd also look at that 200D SL2. What do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I like that camera, but we should save some of it for the wrap up, but I like the EM10 series very much. And Olympus have been particularly consistent across their product line. If you look at Sony, for example, who has tried everything, they're just always throwing new cameras and new features out there. If you look at the EM10, the EM5, the EM1, and you look at it over the period of years that these cameras have been out, Olympus has been sort of steadily refining all of these cameras in rather predictable ways, I would say. But because of that, they've got very consistent design. As you move from one camera to the other, it's very easy to get used to them. And the image quality has just continued to improve. I have not used the camera you're holding in your hand, but I've used the previous versions and liked them very much.
Okay, well, if you have used the EM10 Mark II, you will immediately recognize the EM10 Mark III because superficially they look very, very similar. They appear to share the same body and a lot of the same controls and design, and just kind of like the whole philosophy behind it. But before I go any further and talk about any of the differences, I just want to talk about how it feels in your hands, because this is a mid-range, lower-priced camera. And normally at that point, when you pick up those kind of cameras, they often feel a bit plasticky, a bit hollow, a bit, you know what I mean? They don't kind of exude the confidence that you would get from a more expensive camera, at the over $1,000 mark. But the EM10 Mark II and III they feel really good in your hands. They're very, very compact. And it's like they're so full of technology in such a small case. It's like they feel very dense. It's not heavy, but it feels dense. It feels very solid in your hands. I mean, this camera really does feel like a higher end product, even though it is actually low cost. It's a very classy build. Olympus has slightly adjusted the grip on the front. And even though that grip looks tiny and the camera is very, very small, it feels surprisingly comfortable in your hands. And there's a good size thumb rest on the rear to push your thumb up against. So you really can hold this camera very comfortably. But I think the thing I like most about it and its predecessor, and in fact all Olympus cameras, is that their philosophy is that you can have a small camera, but you don't need tiny buttons and especially tiny dials on it. A lot of other companies, they design a small camera body and then do tiny little dials on it. And also with Olympus, the kind of main threesome of dials on the upper right panel, the mode dial and the two control dials, are really chunky and tall. And they turn with a very, very satisfying click. It's a very positive action. Now, there's no locking button on the mode dial, but it doesn't turn by itself. And I carry these around in quite tight bags and things. And when you pull them out, there's never any surprise what mode it's on. And when you do turn these controls, just the clicks feel nice. Now, this sort of thing is very personal, but for me, Olympus has really nailed these ergonomics. And what I really like about this camera, although it also applies to their other models, is that I can actually hold this camera one-handed with my index finger on the front dial, my thumb on the rear dial, and I can actually adjust both of those dials while still holding it securely, whether I'm composing with the screen or the viewfinder. And there's not many cameras where you can do that, because a lot of the time you have to kind of, you think, if I'm going to access that control, I'd better hold it with both hands, because I feel like it might drop. So I really like that. Now, it doesn't have, I know Doug really likes having the shutter speed dial and the aperture ring on the Fujifilm models, but for me, I really like the retro styling of the Olympus that manages to get in all of those modern features while still looking classy. It's got a power switch on the top left side that looks like one of the controls on the old OM 35mm SLRs. So it's got nods to the past, but it doesn't let the past rule it. Whereas I often personally feel that Fujifilm does let kind of retro styling rule it a little bit. And you can find that some of the dials, which may have been 100% appropriate 20, 30 years ago, now a little bit compromised with like the broader shutter speed ranges that we have and the broader ISO ranges. It's like they don't quite reach in both directions. So Doug, I wanted to ask about your thoughts on their kind of control philosophy, especially compared to Fujifilm, because I reckon Olympus and Fuji really do retro best of all.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I happen to like the more film type controls. I like a real aperture ring. I like a shutter speed dial. I'm not interested in the typical PASM mode dial. It's just not the way my brain works. But I want to say two things about it. First of all, we should point out, I think that camera is available in all black as well as the black and chrome.
It is.
And for me, I would get the all black one. That's just me. The other thing is, when you pick up the OMD EM10 cameras, what they feel like, you said that the dials are full size, but you feel like it's a camera that they've managed to shrink the camera but maintain the control size. I really get a sense when I pick up that camera that they have squeezed the stuff in a good way, but it actually feels like this is a small camera with big camera buttons and dials.
Yeah, in a good way. It's a good squeeze.
Yeah.
The best kind.
That's a roundabout way of giving it a compliment, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. When you look at the controls, now if we look at the older EM10 Mark II, you see Olympus got into a habit of kind of building up the feature set and putting more and more into these cameras. And the EM10 Mark II, you could customize virtually every button. In fact, the buttons on the rear, the main four kind of joypad cross keys weren't even labeled, because you could customize them. You could customize the movie record button. It had 3 actual function buttons. You could customize all of those as well. But they've kind of stepped back from that a bit with the Mark III and said, well, hang on a minute. That's nice for like camera enthusiasts, but how many of the target audience of this camera are actually going to go into that degree of customization? Because when you went into the menus on the Mark II and a lot of other Olympus cameras, I mean, they were bewildering, even for like a camera reviewer who's used to looking at these. You're like, crikey, I can't find anything. I'm not going to be able to use any of these advanced modes. And do I really want to customize everything when in fact if you just give it a harder option, a fixed option, it probably covers what you want. So I'm going to show you the back of the camera, but also describe it for those who are listening to us. If you push up on the joypad, you get ISO. Push left, you can adjust the focus area using the buttons. Down for the drive modes, and right for the flash options. Now, those were unlabeled on the Mark II. So now they've said, look, you can't customize them, but to be honest, that's probably how you're going to use it anyway. And on the top, what they've done, they do have a function button, but they've kind of suggested that you leave it as the digital teleconverter option, and that's the icon that it has on it. But the button I really want to draw your attention to is this one, which is near the power switch on the upper left side. Now, this is very clever. This is really one of the best features on the EM10 Mark III, because what it does, when you press it, it brings up a bunch of options on the screen that are relevant to whatever shooting mode you're in. So I'm going to show you that. And in fact, while I do that, if you're watching the video, you can see how long it takes to power up and for that lens to extend. So I'm going to switch it on. 3, 2, 1. There we go. So about 2 seconds for that lens to extend and for the camera to get into action. So I'm going to show you what it does if you're in PA, S, or M modes. They're the kind of general shooting modes. So if I show you the screen there, look, it's me on the screen of the camera. And I should point out at this point that the Olympus face detection is really, really good, especially the eye detection. Now, if I press this button in the corner, you'll see, if you're an Olympus fan, that you get the super control panel. This is where it fills the screen with lots of options, lots of icons, and you can tap your way through that. It is a touch screen and a rather good touch interface. Now, the cool thing about this is that if you press the OK button in the middle of the joypad, you get the options down the side of the screen. Now, previously, you had to decide whether you wanted that to appear or the super control panel to appear when you press the OK button. But now you don't need to worry about that. If you press the OK button, you get the simplified options at the side of the screen. If you push the big button on the top, you get the super control panel, which has all of them. So already, for me, that's quite nice, but it goes further. If I put it, say, to the scene preset menu, this is what happens when you press the button on the top. So now you can see the scenes are grouped into 6 main categories, whether you're shooting people, landscapes, things in motion, stuff like that. So you can begin to see where they're going with this. If I put it on the art filters, which are Olympus's special effects, which it does particularly well, let's see what you get this time. So now you can see all of the art filters running along the bottom of the screen. And you also see on me there that you get a kind of live preview of how they're going to look. Maybe not ideal on a human subject, but quite neat on some landscapes. Now, if I show you the mode dial on the previous EM10 Mark II, it's pretty much the same set of shooting modes, but the photo story mode is gone. That was a bit of a curious one. That kind of let you, put 3 pictures together in a kind of arrangement, that kind of the sort of thing you do in Instagram, which is okay, but I think they realized that you could probably do it on your phone much better, so they've left it onto that. Interestingly, it's still actually available on the Olympus app running on your phone, so you can do it that way as well. And they've replaced it with this new mode. It's called AP. It stands for Advanced Photographer.
Oh.
Advanced Photography for advanced photographers. Now, here's the cool thing, right? As I said earlier, Olympus packed their cameras with some really interesting modes. It's got some really interesting long exposure modes that can show the picture building up as it records, so you can stop it when it's gone too far or has gone far enough. They have focus bracketing, which is quite unusual in a camera of this class. They have perspective geometric kind of correction. So, when you look up buildings from low down and they converge, well, they can actually stretch them back out again, all in camera. The sort of thing that's easy to do in Photoshop, but not many cameras offer that kind of keystone perspective correction in camera. All sorts of bracketing and all of these modes were available on the Mark II, but they were in various menus, and they were so hard to find sometimes. You had to really delve into that menu system to find them. It was very, very difficult. So somebody very smart at Olympus, whose hand I would like to shake, no, I'm going to hug them if I see them, whether they like it or not, has put them together in the AP menu, and I'll show you them here. So this now gives you quick and easy access to all of these modes. I'm going to press that again so I can see. Hopefully you can see that. I'll tell you which ones they are. So we have live composite, live time, which is kind of like bulb, but it starts with one press and stops with another and can show you the exposure as it builds. We have multiple exposure if you want to stack a couple of pictures for some special effects. We have good old HDR. We have silent mode. Now, this uses the electronic shutter. This used to be in the drive mode, but crikey, that drive mode was hard to understand on Olympus cameras. Not now, you just put it in AP mode, choose silent, and you're off. Panorama, which I'm going to have a go at in a minute and tell you that it's not actually that great. The Keystone Correction that I did tell you about, which allows you to correct the verticals, which does work well. We've got auto exposure bracketing and we've got focus bracketing, although what focus bracketing does, which is pretty neat, is it kind of racks the focus in a burst. The idea being that you then stack those images together to increase your depth of field. It's brilliant for macro. Unfortunately, it doesn't do it in camera. You've got to have your own software to do that. That's a little bit frustrating. The panorama mode, you'd think, well, yeah, it's going to be like and stick it together. No, it doesn't do that. It's like really old school panorama mode where it just shows you guidelines to help you take pictures in a straight line, which you then have to stick together yourself in your own software.
That's no help at all.
No, it's no help at all. So in that respect, the panorama is like way behind what people would expect on a modern camera, especially on a smartphone. And the focus bracketing, yeah, it's brilliant to have it in there, but it's kind of unfortunate that it hasn't gone the extra mile like the EM1 series does, which can actually not only focus bracket, but focus stack within the camera. But the really important thing, again, that I wanted to say to you, Doug, is that this AP mode kind of gathers all of these advanced modes together, which previously were in various drive menus, in various menu pages. There was nothing consistent about it. It was really hard to find them. Now they're all grouped together in this AP menu. And Olympus has also simplified a lot of the options. Now, the obvious question that might be, it's kind of in your mind at this point, is you'd be thinking, well, wait a minute. If I previously selected silent mode from the drive menu, then I could deploy it in any exposure mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, program, whatever. If it's coming out of its own AP mode, then what's the exposure mode? And in fact, if that applies to quiet mode, what's the exposure mode for everything else that's in this AP menu? And the answer is it's program, right? So it's limited control, but it's program with program shift. So you can turn the dial to kind of shift the shutter speed and aperture balance up and down. But it is more basic control. But then, at first I thought that's a limitation because on the other ones you could deploy it in any exposure mode. But actually, it's okay. The Keystone Correction. Do I really care that I'm shooting in program mode? Not really. It's all right. I can shift the program line and still get the depth of field that I want or motion effects. You can work around it. So I've been talking for ages. What do you think about this kind of new arrangement of these modes and the way that they make it easier to access?
I had the same reaction when you were going through them about silent shooting. About why isn't silent shooting applicable to all the modes? Why is it a separate mode? It seemed to be silent shutter should be a bit orthogonal to the rest of them, if you forgive my use of that word. Personally, I never use them. I'm always a raw shooter. I'm always doing things in post rather than in the camera. The only time I ever use some of these kinds of modes at all is for reviews, to be honest with you. But after all, you are one of the world's most famous JPEG shooters. And, oh, look, there's even a book about how to do everything in the camera and shoot JPEG all the time. Gordon Lang's In Camera, which by the way, I have a copy. This is a marvelous book. And people keep looking at this and saying, really, he did all that stuff in the camera? So it's very impressive.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Sorry, a little plug there. But in answer to your question, I think they're great. I never use them. How's that for an answer?
It's a very honest answer. I mean, as the book says, in camera, I like to do everything in camera. So I do actually use these features quite a lot, especially the Keystone Correction. When I'm lucky enough to visit cities like New York, which have got a lot of tall buildings, it's amazing how when you point up at them from the ground, I mean, obviously the verticals are converging, but you can really straighten them out quite effectively. And it's nice to be able to do that. And then just your picture's good to go. And because it's kind of doing that pixel wrangling inside the camera at the point of capture, it doesn't look half bad, actually. It does a really nice job of it. So I agree with you, and I love your use of the word orthogonal. We should do more of that. By the way, when you do buy in camera, you support our work, so please do that. I was a little bit concerned about, the silent mode is now only available in AP mode on the dial, which then limits what you can use it for, what you can use it with. But let's look at how Olympus did it before. Now, if you're familiar with Olympus cameras, you'll know about the drive menu, which honestly is probably one of my least favorite things in the whole camera industry, because there's like a little square for like single pictures, and there's a square with little kind of rectangles behind it for, continuous shooting. That I get. But there's 3 versions of each of them. There's the square by itself. There's a square with a tiny, and I'm talking tiny diamond next to it, and a square with a tiny heart next to it. Now, what does the heart and the diamond mean? Right? Is this some sort of crazy card game that Olympus is playing with us? Are they encouraging gambling here? And I have to remind myself with every Olympus camera that I use that the diamond represents, of course, first curtain shutter for anti-shock. So what that means is it's an electronic first curtain and a mechanical rear curtain, which is actually the mode you should really be using. And interestingly, the mode the EM10 Mark III defaults to, unlike its predecessor where you had to set it on the diamond. So the diamond is the default mode. And the heart means fully electronic or silent. Of course, heart and diamond, who wouldn't know that diamond was electronic first curtain and heart was fully electronic? That confuses the hell out of me. So the drive menu on previous Olympus cameras, oh God, I hated it. I mean, I love Olympus cameras, but I hate the drive menu. So the fact that they've at least taken out the heart and put it somewhere else, and at least they've made the anti-shock, the electronic first curtain, the default, which it should be. So this camera has less chance, because at certain shutter speeds, some cameras actually go whoo like that and kind of wobble themselves a bit, and you get something called shutter shock. So by implementing an electronic first curtain, you avoid that without the downside of a fully electronic with potential for skewing. So it's the perfect mode, and it defaults to that. So I'm pleased with that. So yeah, there's downsides to it that you can't apply it to everything now because it's only in the AP menu, but I think they've made it easier to use. In fact, also, if I show you I thought this was quite neat. If I show you the fully auto, kind of green auto mode. So if I press the button in the corner there, you can see that it actually lets you change things like the color and the contrast, saturation, and stuff like that. But at the bottom of the page, it's actually got shooting tips. And look, it's got built-in tips. Say it goes, hey there, are you taking a picture of a kid? If you are, why don't you get down to their level? I don't mean by talking like a kid, but, getting down on your knees or lying down so you're at the same eye level. Same with pets. I would always recommend that. It's a great tip. So it's got some shooting tips built into it. So, and it's all accessed from the same button. So that's the thing I like about it. Whatever mode you're in, whether you're a beginner or an advanced photographer, if you press this button in the top left corner, it will give you options that are important and relevant to you and pitched at the right level for that mode as well. So the reason I've gone on about this a lot is because this is actually one of the main new features on the Mark III. Beyond that, I'm going to be going over a lot of things that were standard on the Mark II. But stick around because we've got some other things to tell you about. So Doug, we're going to move on.
Yeah, but let me ask you about here's my concern about that. So if you hand this camera to somebody who is enough of a novice that they would use the tips, would they go to the trouble to find the tips? Because it's not like the first button you press brings up the tips. You've got to actually go in there, push the button on the top deck, and then you have to go down to the last option there. And I'm thinking, if you have to go to that much trouble to get help, are you actually going to ask for help?
Moving on. I don't know. Possibly not.
Yeah.
Possibly not.
Yeah, it's an interesting feature, but it seems almost a bit tucked away.
Yeah, but if that isn't the one that you put there first, at least things like, hey, do you want to make the color stronger or weaker? Or hey, do you want to change the kind of depth of field, the amount of blurring? Yeah. Presents those first. So it lets you get a bit more creative first before it then says, look, mate, obviously if you've gotten this far down the menu, you've got absolutely no idea what you're doing to have. Maybe that's how they do it.
That's it. Okay.
That they can imagine how the conversation proceeds. Saturation, no. Depth of field, no. All right. Here's how you're going to do it.
And then you're one of those people who's there looking and talking to your camera.
Yeah, definitely will, yeah.
All right, yes, let's move on, as you said.
Okay, so compositionally, it's the same as its predecessor. It's got a built-in electronic viewfinder. It's an OLED panel, which is nice, high contrast, bright colors, 2.36 million dot, 0.62 times magnification. What that means is that it is roughly the same resolution as all but the very highest end electronic viewfinders, but the magnification is kind of comparable in its class, but there's some models that produce a bigger image. For example, Panasonic deploy a higher magnification at this level than most of the competition do. But once you get up to about the $1,000 level, most of them are doing like, 0.7 times magnification, produces a bigger image to look at. Same amount of detail, it's just nicer, like a comfier seat or something. It's nicer. It's not necessary, but it's nicer. Interestingly, that's one of the differentiators with the EM5 Mark II, if you choose to go to that higher level. The one thing worth mentioning about the viewfinder is that most viewfinder panels are 4:3 in shape. Now, because most cameras shoot a native shape of 3:2, which is actually wider, then most of them are actually displaying the image in the viewfinder with a black bar at the top and the bottom. Or sometimes they shift the picture up and they have a really thick black bar, say, at the bottom. And they use it for shooting information, which is fine. But the interesting thing about Micro Four Thirds, and that's the format which Olympus and Panasonic use, is that its native aspect ratio is 4:3. And that means that the image actually fills the full height of the viewfinder panel. I mean, it's not quite like going to an IMAX film, which is filmed in 1570, and it goes, wow, look, it's Batman, it's huge, or Tron Legacy. It's suddenly really expanded to fill the picture. But it's big, it's tall, it feels taller than a lot of them, and it's also bigger than most comparable DSLR viewfinders. So we could argue about 0.62 times versus 0.7 times, but the bottom line is that they're bigger and they got loads more information than a typical DSLR at this price point. So I like the viewfinder. It's also obviously as a 100% live view camera, mirrorless camera. It has a screen which you can use for composition. It's a 3-inch tilting screen. It tilts up by about 90 degrees, tilts down by about 45 degrees. We've already mentioned that it's touch sensitive, and Olympus has got a good interface for that. What it won't do, of course, this vertical tilting is fine when you're shooting in the landscape orientation, but if you turn the camera on the side, as I often do, and shoot in the portrait orientation, well, that tilt is not going to help you at high or low angles. It'll help you if you're shooting around a corner, but it's not going to help you if you're, shooting low down or over the heads of crowds. Likewise, it's not going to flip forward to face the subject, so you're not going to be filming pieces to camera or doing selfies with this. It has got great face detection, so if you do, roughly point the camera at you, it is probably going to focus on you, but you're not going to be able to see whether your face is actually on the frame or where you want it to be on the frame. And I think this is a bit of a limitation, really, because a lot of people buying a camera at this price point are probably quite into selfies. Possibly, is that an unfair comment? I don't know. Put it this way, I really like having a fully articulated screen, and Olympus give you that on the EM5 Mark II, Panasonic give you it on the G80, G85, but almost no one else does. So if you buy the EM10 Mark II or 3, tilts only. If you buy the Sony A6000 series, it's tilt only. If you buy the Fujifilm X-T10 or X-T20, it's tilt only. What do you think, Doug, to a screen that only tilts vertically? Does it limit you, or are you like, what is he on about?
I think that there are only two reasons I need a fully articulating screen. One, of course, is video. If you're shooting video, it's so much nicer to have a fully articulating screen. I don't shoot much video. The other being, as you say, selfie modes. So for me, the tilt is enough. But again, if you want to shoot video or selfies, you need something that's a little more.
Okay, if we have a quick look at the side of the camera, if I open it up and have a look at the ports, we've got a USB port and an HDMI port. Now, Olympus in the past had a nasty habit of using a non-standard USB port, which did mean you could use their USB remote accessory, but it meant if you lost that cable, you were stuffed. If you wanted to, connect something to, you needed to buy their USB cord. And I always have to remember where mine is for, because I do have an old EM1, and every time there's a firmware update, which Olympus are great at doing, I have to dig it out in order to connect it to my laptop to do the firmware update, because it comes via the laptop, not onto a memory card. So I'm pleased to see that they've gone for a standard USB port on this. But unfortunately, it still doesn't charge over USB. No, none of these Olympus mirrorless cameras charge over USB, which to me is a terrible shame. You can, of course, charge. It comes with a mains adapter. That's fine. I don't want to get rid of that mains adapter. Yeah, that's great if you've got an AC socket handy, or you want to charge the battery and still use the camera. But I just like topping them up when I'm out and about. I like to be able to top them up, if I'm driving from one location to another, or if I'm, say, on a train, I can just connect it to a portable USB battery, which I'm carrying anyway for my phone and other USB devices. I don't want to have to carry a separate power block and look out for an AC outlet. It's just not convenient. So I feel that's a bit of a limitation. You like USB charging?
Yeah, that's actually become very important to me. I hate, especially when you have a small diminutive camera like that, you don't want to carry around an extra piece of stuff. I've been fanatical about the Fuji cameras that don't have an electronic lens cap, for example. I don't want to go out on the street and have to carry an extra lens cap. So USB, even my Sony A9 charges via USB, which is sort of nice. And, standard USB, very important, but I want to be able to just have the camera, pick up a generic cable, charge my battery.
It also doesn't have a microphone input. So the fact that the screen doesn't flip forward to face you and it doesn't have a microphone input is beginning to rule this camera out for kind of vloggers, which is a shame because, as I'm about to show you, the image stabilization is absolutely fantastic and they've also greatly improved the video quality. So let's talk about image stabilization next, because this is something that Olympus really pioneered, which was sensor shift stabilization, which gets better with every generation. Although this camera, the EM10 Mark III, basically inherits the same system as the EM10 Mark II, which means it's the same as the EM1 Mark I. So Olympus has actually got 2 generations ahead of that, right? So the EM5 Mark II is ahead of this camera, and the EM1 Mark II is ahead of all of them. But it's still a really good system. It's still a 5-axis stabilization system. It's good for about 4 stops of compensation. With this camera, with the EM10 Mark III, I can handhold a wide angle, say sort of 28 mil equivalent, at about half a second, which is great. On the EM5 Mark II, I could handhold that at about 1 second. On the EM1 Mark II, I could handhold that at about 2 seconds, which is ridiculous. So it's not as good as those higher end models, but it's still very good. And as I always say in my reviews, it's not just about when you're taking the picture, because a lot of people go, stabilization, blah, blah, blah. No good if you're shooting subjects in motion. You need a fast shutter speed for that. And I say, yeah, but it's very, very handy for stabilizing the picture as you compose it. Now, I like shooting with prime lenses because they're generally better quality, shallow depth of field. And it forces me to think more than using a zoom. But a lot of those prime lenses across all systems are unstabilized. And as you're looking at longer and longer focal lengths, I hate composing with that image wobbling around. Whereas when I put it on the Olympus body or bodies with good built-in body-based stabilization, it just steadies that out when you compose. So for me, the stabilization is good, not just for when you take the picture, but for composing as well. So I'm glad they've got that. But I want to show you it now. I'm going to show you a video clip which actually shows it in action on a movie. Now, this is me walking along with the camera around Brighton. This is quite a cool area of Brighton called the North Lane. Lots of interesting shops and things. I'm using the 14 to 42 millimeter kit zoom, zoomed at 14 millimeter, and I'm holding this out. I'm not cheating. I'm not giving it an advantage here by holding the viewfinder to my eye, although you can for even greater stability. I'm holding it out. Not at arm's length, but I'm holding it with my arms, composing with the screen. And I'm also using the movie image stabilization mode that uses sensor shift and additional digital stabilization. Now, this incurs a bit of a crop. If you don't want that crop, you can shoot with sensor shift only, and it's still very good. But look at how smooth this is. I mean, this video is incredibly smooth. It's almost like kind of Steadicam type footage. It's got that kind of floating look. But of course, there's no rig involved. And that's the really nice thing about these systems, is that you can, run and gun very, very easily. I'm getting very usable footage here without needing to, attach any accessories, which makes it all the more frustrating that it doesn't have a fully articulated screen and it doesn't have a microphone input. But the stabilization works a treat. And even though we're showing this at a kind of low resolution because of the way that we record these conversations between Doug and I, this clip was originally filmed in 4K video. And if you go to my review at cameralabs.com, you can access that 4K video, because this is a big new feature. The biggest feature upgrade over the EM10 Mark II is 4K. Now, Olympus has never been fantastic video kind of traditionally in the past, but it's really seeing this as an important thing. It's got to improve, and it did a great job on the EM1 Mark 1, and now on the EM10 Mark 2, it does look very, very good. So it's giving you the full coverage if you are only using sensor shift stabilization, and it's very, very detailed. I think it looks pretty good. So it'll do 4K up to 30p. It'll do 1080 up to 60p. And if you want slower motion, it'll do 720p up to 120p. So that allows you to do a slowdown. I mean, Doug, you used to do some movie stuff and work in that industry. I mean, you've seen people set up those rigs. I've done some filming with people, and it's like, right, let's go. And they're like, no, wait a minute. And they're attaching stuff to it. It takes ages. So I think the ability to, get really stable footage without any accessories cannot be underestimated.
No, you're right. You're right. And
Overestimated.
Olympus, as you said, this is sort of one of their earliest generations of image stabilization, which has gotten better. But even these very early techniques were very, very good. I remember calling the original OMD EM1 having spooky. That was the phrase I used, if you remember, the spooky image stabilization. Very impressive.
So this is equally spooky because it shares essentially the same system as the EM1 Mark 1. Now, the funny thing is, though, is even though it has got proper 4K in it, the time-lapse video option on it kind of inherits the software from the older version, which didn't have 4K. So it's got this kind of bizarre limitation that they didn't update. So it does have an intervalometer, it does have time-lapse shooting, and if you want, you can get it to encode it into a video at the end. But, and this is crazy, you will only get 30 frames per second. You only get smooth motion if you choose to encode at 720p. I don't want to encode at 720p. If you encode at 1080p, the maximum time-lapse movie frame rate becomes 15 frames per second. And in fact, while I talk about this, here is a 1080p movie at 15 frames per second. And you can see it's even at 15, it's still quite jerky. By the way, I filmed this with the 75mm, quite a long lens, and I pre-focused it in the distance, so people are going in and out of focus, almost like a kind of miniature effect. I quite like that on a time-lapse. You can encode it in 4K, but only at 5 frames per second. And that doesn't look great. And that was kind of semi-acceptable on the Mark II because it didn't film normal 4K video. But now you've got normal 4K video. It's like, why didn't they update the time-lapse? Especially as Panasonic have let you encode 4K 30 frames per second time-lapses in camera for ages. So that is a bit disappointing. But you can at least use the touchscreen to refocus while you film. So here's another clip. This is a clip-tastic show. So if you're listening to us audio only, here's a great reason to check out the video version. Don't forget to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Really helps. So close to 100,000 subscribers. Please, if you subscribe and get me over that. Apparently, doors open at Google that previously are firmly shut. Last time I went in to visit Google or YouTube, they said, do you want a coffee? I was like, yeah, sure, I want a coffee. And they went, well, the machine's over there. I was like, oh. It's like just a vending machine. And I said, well, what about that up there? There's like a proper barista and a cafe. And they looked at me and they said, that's not for you. That's not for you. I said, well, who's it for? They went, that's for the people with more than 100,000 subscribers. And I said, what about that one up there? And they went, that's definitely not for you. That's the 1 million subscribers. Now, I'm a long way off that one, but I'm tantalizingly close. So if you're watching and enjoy our work, please subscribe, and I'll tell you what happens when I get a badge, apparently, or something. Anyway, moving on. You can tap to full focus, again at 4K. Now, you'll notice in this clip that the camera hunts a little bit as it tries to find the target. That is because the EM10 Mark III, like its predecessors, uses a contrast-based focusing system only. Contrast-based is very accurate and can work in very low light. And in single AF terms can be very quick. But it can't help but go beyond. It doesn't know when to stop. It has to focus beyond the subject and then go, it's getting sharper, it's getting sharper, it's getting really sharp. Oh, it's getting less sharp, it's getting less sharp. I've gone beyond it. I've got to go back. And then it goes back and nails it. But it has to go beyond it. And that's the downside to contrast-based autofocus, especially noticeable on videos. And it slows it down when it comes to continuous autofocus when you're trying to shoot action. And this was a limitation on the Mark II, and I'm sad to say it's still a limitation on the Mark III. They just can't focus very effectively on subjects moving towards you at speed. Now, this camera can shoot at 8.5 frames per second, and I've timed it. It does do that, and it can do it for very long bursts. Even in RAW, it can do it for long bursts if you've got a nice fast memory card. But pointed at something moving, And if you're shooting at the high speed burst mode, I was basically getting nothing in focus. That's with birds in flight or people cycling towards me at quite a modest speed. These are not athletes, just, commuters, shaking their fist. Who's that man taking photos of me? Stop that man. Because Ben, my friend Ben, who normally cycles towards me, wasn't available. So I had to go for like strangers. They don't like it. If you slow down to the slower speed, which is about 4 frames per second, it will have a go at it. But even then, I was finding literally just the last 3 or 4 frames were in focus, and anything preceding it, when the subject was a bit smaller, it was really hit and miss. So if you want to shoot action, if you've got active kids, pets, or you're into sport, this probably isn't the camera for you. Now, Olympus do embedded phase detect on their sensors, but only when you're on the EM1 series. So you've got to spend a lot if you want an Olympus that can really focus well on action. But there are, it's becoming a bit lonely against its rivals. Fujifilm has embedded phase detect, so does Sony. Canon does it very, very well. Panasonic is contrast-based only, but they've got their DFD technology, which is quite good. So Olympus has kind of fallen behind. This is the real weak point of this camera in terms of its feature set, which is that it's not brilliant at capturing action that's moving towards you. But, are we overstating this, Doug? I mean, how many people is that important to? Because you've got to look at how you use the camera. And in terms of single autofocus, if I'm taking pictures of buildings or landscapes or friends, pictures of people, it focuses very quickly. It focuses in low light. It's got brilliant face detection and eye detection. So, it's all very well having a go at it for not having great continuous AF, but it's got brilliant single AF. So what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I'm listening to you. I'm sort of sitting back and thinking about all the reviews we've done. Virtually every camera we review is going to give you excellent pictures for 80% of the situations. So I think what we're talking about is figuring out what about the other 20%? What's important to you? Is it live action? Do you need something that autofocus for something coming quickly directly at you? Is it low light? Is it something else? So I think that if you say, I need a camera that shoots people moving quickly or objects moving quickly, then you're probably going to look at a different camera. But anyway, we'll save it for the wrap up.
Well, we're getting close to that point now. I just want to briefly say it does, of course, have Wi-Fi. It's the same implementation as previous models. So it doesn't have NFC, so you're not going to be holding your phone to it. It doesn't have Bluetooth, so it doesn't maintain that connection. But it does have quite a good, easy way of doing a connection. It uses a QR code. For the first time that you connect, displays a QR code, you fire up the Olympus app on your phone and just point the phone at it, and it will connect straight away. And it's also been generally good in my experience at remembering that connection. So when you tap the Wi-Fi icon on the camera screen, it does generally work quite well with your phone, or at least it did with mine. I use a Samsung Galaxy S7, an Android phone. When you're using the app, you can remote control it pretty effectively. You can record movies. You can't tap to focus in movies, but you can control pretty much every other aspect of the exposure mode in stills. You can, of course, transfer pictures wirelessly at full resolution or reduced resolution. And the geo-tagging works quite well as well. It captures a log, it records the log, and then applies it after the event. But it does it quite well. It kind of waits for the next time you connect to, say, transfer an image or do remote control, and it goes, hey, I've got a log of GPS stuff. Do you want me to tag it while yeah, sure, okay, go ahead. So that kind of wraps it up. I think the two big things that we need to talk about are the two limitations. The continuous autofocusing capability is not brilliant. Is that a problem? And is it a problem to only have 16 megapixels in this day and age when 24 really is the standard, especially on a bigger sensor, an APS-C sensor? Most of its rivals have got 24 megapixel APS-C sensors, and this camera only, in inverted commas, has a 16 megapixel MFT, micro four thirds sensor. So they're the two big things. What do you think?
Well, for me, the megapixel issue is a non-issue. The only reason that I need more than 16 megapixels is if I'm either making a large print or I'm going to do substantial cropping. Otherwise, the difference between 16 and 24 isn't that great. I mean, I'm very used to still using older cameras that were 12 megapixels, and I thought that was a lot. So that's not the issue so much. I think the image stabilization particularly for video. I don't use much image stabilization in still pictures because I tend to use high shutter speeds. And so the stabilization is not really an issue for me. But if you're shooting video, I think stabilization is now a very important feature in any camera for video.
And Olympus is so good at it. Even though this is 2 generations old, effectively, the stabilization on it, it's still very, very, very good. Although that said, I would say that Panasonic have caught up with that generation on their latest Lumix G bodies. And Sony's pretty close as well, especially on its APS-C A6000 series.
How do you feel about 16 versus 24 megapixels? How does it affect your photography?
Well, it doesn't really. And in fact, if I return to my in-camera book here, most of the pictures in this book were taken at 16 megapixels, either with an EM1 or a Fujifilm X-T1, both of which were 16. I think the X-T1 was 16, certainly well less than 24. And they look fine. It's a published book that you can buy in the shops, and they look all right to me. I mean, these are only like 10 by 8 pictures, but they look pretty good. I have no problem at all with the image quality at 16 megapixels. Obviously, there's less latitude for cropping, but I always try and frame the shot so that I don't need to crop that much. And luckily, I've got access to some longer lenses that allow me to get close to distant subjects, so I don't need to crop to make them bigger. So to me, yeah, you might think, oh, it's 2017 and it's 16 megapixels. It's not very much, but I'm cool with that. I'm actually more at peace with that than I am with the continuous autofocus limitations. So I'm fine with 16 MP because, like I say, almost everything in this book was shot at 16 and they look fine. In terms of and also in terms of the size of the sensor, I'm also cool with micro four thirds. Again, look in my book; those pictures look absolutely fine. And the stabilization also allows you, if you were shooting static subjects, to deploy nice low ISOs. So you rarely get to the point where you see the difference between those sensor sizes. It's only people, say like Doug, who need to shoot in low light at high shutter speeds. Therefore, they have to shoot at high ISO. That's where you notice difference in sensor size. So if you're that kind of person, yeah, you should probably be looking at an APS-C model or even a full frame model. The continuous AF thing is tricky. As an all-rounder, you kind of think, yeah, this will do everything, great travel camera and everything, but the day I want to shoot my kid's sports day or my dog running towards me, it's not going to do a great job at it. That is slightly off-putting, but I kind of loop back to the price at the beginning, which is that it's actually quite affordable for what it is, and that the cameras that are either do everything better are generally twice the price, or the ones that are better at continuous autofocus at the same price, like the Sony A6000, are much more limited in other ways. So you have to kind of, if you've got like, $500, $600, $700 to spend, there is definitely a point where you have to look at the feature set and say what's more important to you. And the bottom line is, again, I was a little bit concerned when the EM10 Mark III was first announced. I thought, it's just a refresh of the EM10 Mark II. It's the EM10 Mark II with 4K, and they've mucked about with the menus and the buttons a bit. But when I picked it up again, it was like greeting an old friend. I was like, I love this little camera. It's tiny, but it feels good. It feels solid. It's affordable, but it doesn't feel shoddy in any way. The controls work brilliantly. I'm fine with 16 megapixels. Hey, look at that stabilization again. And look, they've improved it. It works in the video. And the 4K video looks really nice on it. And then I thought, well, I suppose I better look at this new menu system. And then I tried the AP mode, and I tried that button in the top corner. And it was like, oh, yeah, all of those things that were so hard to find are now much easier to find. They made it so much easier for the target market, people going for their first interchangeable lens camera. They made it easier for them, but they've also made it easier to access some of the more interesting modes on it that previously were hidden away to such an extent that even I would go, I can't be bothered. I've bored trying to find it. So I really like it. Even though it's, quite limited, it's only 16 megapixels. The autofocus for moving subjects is not great anymore. I still like it. It's a camera that calls out to me. But I really like the physical design of them.
Yeah, for me, I don't usually on these reviews come out with strong yes, no, this is better, that is better opinions. I leave the serious reviewing to you, Gordon. You're the expert, and you've got the camera in your hand. I've never actually shot with it, but I'll tell you, to me, this camera fits one niche, and that's obviously small size, low price. I think this is a great camera to take out with a compact lens. I mean, if you're going to shoot with a big lens, you don't really need a small body. If anything, it defeats the purpose to have this little teeny body and this really big lens. But with a compact lens, I think it's a nice combination. You can do the whole thing for what, about $800 or so with lens. Very nice. However, let me say, if video was important to me, I would look more seriously at the Lumix G80, G85. That's sort of one of the cameras still to beat when it comes to shooting video. Panasonic really, I think, excels in how they do video, and that's their heritage, really. If I was focused on stills, I would probably spend the extra 50%, is it 50%? No, about 40%, and step up to the EM5 Mark II. I think that, to me, there's enough better in terms of the stabilization and the other things that EM5 Mark II, to me, is worth the extra dollars.
If you like Olympus's approach, the M5 Mark II is really nice because on top of this body, the EM10 Mark III gives you better image stabilization, a bigger EVF, bigger electronic viewfinder, a fully articulated screen. It gives you this 40 megapixel composite mode, which works nicely for static subjects, give you high resolution. It's got better connectivity, a microphone input, PC sync input for external lighting. Doesn't have 4K, but that may or may not bother you, but I like the M5 Mark II, although again, not great at continuous autofocusing.
Video, I go with the Lumix G85. Stills, I'd go to the EM5 Mark II. And for price and size, you can't beat this camera. It's true. And I should point out that if you're interested in any of these cameras that we've mentioned, or even cameras we haven't mentioned, I want you to go over to cameralabs.com, because Gordon, sometimes with me, sometimes all on his own, he has reviewed every great camera that's out there. And if you click on the buy now buttons, that helps put coffee in our mouths. Wait, that doesn't sound good. Click on the buy now buttons, because those affiliate revenues do help us quite a bit. Make sure you go to YouTube and subscribe to the channel. Gordon's got to get this 100,000 mark, because he needs to be able to go to Google and get coffee from the real coffee machine. He wants a barista. He doesn't want an automatic machine. Take a look at In Camera, that book that's over Gordon's shoulder. It is not only is it great photography, I mean, the images are marvelous, but it really will give you a whole new way of looking at how you should go out and shoot to try and get things right in camera, and to show you what you can do. You'll be amazed at what you see in there, that really everything was done in the camera, and it's JPEG. It's amazing.
Yeah, and all mirrorless. And interestingly, on the front cover, that's an EM10 Mark II. Still in black and silver. But again, as we were discussing in the show, virtually all 16 megapixel as well. So, if you're obsessing over megapixels, it shows that the results at 16 are absolutely fine. And I should also say, if you want to go shooting with Doug, and who wouldn't, because he's such a wonderful guy, then check out dougk.com and find out if he's doing a workshop in your area. Definitely worth looking at. So thanks for watching. If you got to this far, well done. We should plant more Easter eggs so people can say in the comments if they got to the end. But they could, of course, just fast forward. You wouldn't do that, would you? You wouldn't.
No, I don't think nobody would. Nobody would, because they want to hear every word that we have to say.
Exactly.
Anyway, Gordon, thanks again. We'll see you next time on another review here at the Camera Labs Photography Podcast. Bye-bye. See ya.
Bye.